Everybody, good morning. We are on this Tanas Esther going to study Megillat Esther, the first parak in Megillat Esther, based on the insights of Rabbi Soloveitchik. So the best way to always do this is read the text so we have a sense of what's in front of us, right? By Hebrew, and we all know this, we've been reading this for many, many years, right? But at least we know the storyline. We're going to see some fascinating insights. It happened in the days of Achashverosh, who ruled 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. At that time, at that time, at that time, when King Achashverosh sat upon his royal throne in the imperial city of Shushan, it was the third year of his rule, and he threw a big party. Who did he throw it for? For all his ministers and his courtiers. The military men of Persia and of Media, the noblemen and the ministers of the provinces. So he's throwing a big party on the third year, right, of his malchut for all of the aristocrats. Baroto, Osher Kvod Malchuto, V'Tziyakar Tiferet Gulato, Yamim Rabim Shmonim U'Me'at Yom. He doesn't throw a day party. He throws a party for 180 days. Not bad, right? Okay, and there for many days together, 180 days in all, he displayed all the wealth of his noble reign and the glory of his dazzling greatness. He's showing off, right, for 180 days. Plus, okay. Well, he was politically correct. You can't just throw parties for the hoi polloi, right? You have to throw it for everybody. When the time had passed, the king held a feast for all the men of the imperial city. Everybody was invited, every citizen, from the greatest to the lowest, in the courtyard of the king's palace, right? And in King's Palace garden. That's where he threw this party. Chur, Karpas, Utchelet, Achuz, Bechad Levutz, Varkaman, Al Gigulei Pesa, Al Gililei Chesev Amudei Sheish, Mitot, Zahav, Chesev, Aritzpat, Pahat, Vashesh, Vidar, Visochares. He throws a party again here. Swats of fine white fabric there, of precious cotton, of sky blue wool, all corded with strands of the finest linen and the scarlet, and draped over silver bars. I mean, he's throwing a party, right? He's not letting anything pass. And the guests were served their drink in the vessels of gold, vessels unlike any other. Royal wine, abundant, right? Rav Kiyad HaMelech. And the drinking was strictly without duress. You could drink whatever you wanted. It flowed. It was a free bar. Open bar. So the king had instructed all of the overseers of his home to honor the wishes of each and every man. You could drink as much as you wanted. Wonder what year's scotch was, but okay, right? Okay, very good. He had quite a party. And so he did two parties, right? 180-day party for the aristocracy and a 7-day party for the regular citizen of Shushan. Meanwhile, Vashti, through the queen, made a feast for her own, a woman's feast. Okay, in King Achashverosh's royal palace. And on the 7th day of the feast, when the king had grown quite merry from the wine, and now he turns to these 7 men, the 7 eunuchs who attended the king, Achashverosh, and he said he gave them what? And he instructed them to go and bring Vashti, the queen, before the king in her royal crown to show the people and the ministers her charms, for she was beautiful indeed. Okay? Vashti, the queen Vashti, refused. She refused, and she conveyed her message to his messengers, like so. And fury engulfed him. He was being stood up by his wife, and he was just very angry. Now the king addressed the wise men who knew how to read the times, for it was the king's practice to consult with those who knew the statutes and the laws. And the men of his closest circle, those who came freely into the king's presence, his cabinet, right, and occupied the first position of the realm. These were 7, and we're told who they are. And he meets with them. And she wants to know. He asks them, what should I do with Vashti? What should I do? She has not obeyed my rules. So, and Memuchan replied, by the way, it's not only that the king, that Vashti has wronged, but all the ministers and all the peoples of the country. Everybody has been violated by her refusing to come. For this tale of the queen will go to all women, casting their husbands into their contempt, as they say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti be brought before him, but she did not come. In other words, you're going to destroy all rules of the men. The women will now take over, right? Okay. And yes, this very day, all the ministers, the wives of Persia and Media who heard that what the queen did will tell the king's ministers, and there'll be no end to contempt and to fury. In other words, you're going to destroy the total operation with men being the rulers, right? Because now women will have gained the upper hand. If then it so pleases the king, let royal declaration be sent out from him and be written among the laws of Persia and Madai, that it never be revoked, that Vashti shall come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and the king shall give her rule over to some other woman, to one who is better than she. And the king's decree shall be heeded and obeyed in the entire empire, great as it is, that all women must honor their husbands from the greatest to the lowest. And the suggestion pleased the king and the ministers, and the king did just as Memuchan had suggested. He sent scrolls to all of the king's provinces, province by province, each in its script, and the people by people, each in its language, ruling that each man be a master in his home, speaking the language of his own people. So that is the story, right? The death of Vashti, which is going to lead to the rise of Esther. So when you read this first chapter and all of the drinking, what? No, it was suggested. He accepted their suggestion that she should be right here. Right, Pasuk Tezayin. Then he says, this is terrible. Once again. Yeah, it is implied. Right, okay. Well, that she will be no longer, it says. She will be no longer. Right? And she'll be no longer. Okay, so when you read when one reads this first chapter of Megillat Esther, it appears that the whole purpose of this whole opening story is to tell us how Vashti is killed, making room for Esther. That's what it would seem to be. That's why. What else would it suggest? It's really telling us, okay, Vashti is gone. Now we're going to see the rise of Esther. Rav Soloveitchik sees this chapter not just limited to learning about how Vashti is deposed and Esther is replaces her, but something else. What is it? We're getting a sense of the main character. Who's the main character? Achashverosh. We have to know what makes him tick. We can't understand this story without understanding Achashverosh. So it's not just when you read the story, when I read the story, when we just quickly read that first chapter, we think what we're getting is a story about how we get rid of Vashti and how Esther takes over. No, much more here. You are getting a picture of what makes Achashverosh tick. Now let's take a look and see how Rav Soloveitchik understands this in the words of the first chapter. Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh, those opening words. The Rav wants to know, is this opening pasuk just a historic comment, a historic perspective? Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. Okay, you should know. You have to know history. So history is, this was Achashverosh's period of rulership, a historic perspective. The Rav feels, no, the pasuk is not interested in telling us history. That's not what's happening. What the Megillah is challenging the reader, it's challenging you and me to read very carefully. What is it challenging us? Probe. What motivates the king to act the way he acts? How can he dispose his wife in the story? How does he act? And the first chapter is giving you a challenge. Understand what makes him work. What is he thinking? The answer is found Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. In other words, all that happens in this story could only have happened in the days of Achashverosh. And the proof is what happens right after the word Vayhi b'mei Achashverosh. Who? Achashverosh. He's Achash. Do you want to understand? This could have never happened in any other kingdom. This happens because of the personality called Achashverosh. We got to figure out what it is, and we will get a very clear insight into who he is in this first chapter. But we are being told, you want to understand this whole story, Rav Soloveitchik says? You have to understand Achashverosh. Vayhi b'mei melech Achashverosh, it couldn't have happened anywhere else. Who Achashverosh? He's the one who causes it all to happen. Okay? The next word, Hamolech, tells you right away. You want to understand who this guy is? The book immediately gives you a clue. Hamolech, who was ruling. This man was paranoid. That's what Hamolech means. Everything that made him work, he has to be the one ruling. He's checking. He's the Putin of his time, if you will. He's worried. Are there going to be people behind him ready to kill him? He's checking everything. He moves around looking at every corner, and everything that he does is because he's paranoid. Hamolech is teaching you the man is a paranoid ruler. That is number one in understanding how this whole story happens. Continues on. Go to, then what does he do? He holds asa mishteh l'chol sarav v'avodav in Pasuk Gimel. He throws a party for whom? He throws a party for VIPs. You're reading this. What book is this all about? Who's this book written for? No, it's written for you and me. It's written for the Jewish nation. It's written for you and me. The non-Jews read our Bible, but it's written for you and me. Esther was written for you and me to know the story of Purim. What's the question that you have to ask when you're reading this?
Why should we care?
Why should we care that he threw parties? Do we care how Achashverosh throws parties? He throws a 180-day party for aristocracy. He throws a 7-day party for the regular citizen. Who cares? How much he drinks? Who cares? Does that have an impact upon us? How he parties? And so Rav Soloveitchik says, it's teaching us a lesson that resonates with us in particular today. And I'll show it to you. And I quote the Rav. There are no neutral events in human history which the Jew may dismiss as irrelevant. Everything that happens in the news has an impact upon the Jew. The Jew is totally involved in all events. The partying of the White House is important to us. Everything is important to us. It has an impact on us. And why do I say it resonates with us? Well, there was an excellent article by Yaakov Katz, who's the editor and chief editor of the Jerusalem Post, just so happens to be also an observant Jew. Yaakov Katz, a brilliant writer. I don't know if you read his article. He writes an article every Friday for his article. It's the editor's article. You can get it online. I get it to my email. It is excellent. It is his perspective. I usually it resonates with me. By the way, his background is he is a military reporter. That's his brilliance. He wrote the most important work on how Israel bombed the Syrian nuclear plant. He is the authoritative thinker, not only thinker, journalist, and he wrote the book. And by the way, you should read it. I highly recommend the book on how the Syrian nuclear plant was bombed. You will not put it down. That's how exciting and interesting it is. He's a brilliant, brilliant writer. But he wrote when the Ukraine issue was just beginning, right? The invasion was just happening. He says, how is this going to impact Israel? And he wrote, and he was right. It's going to impact it. You can say Ukraine. How's that going to impact Israel? Oh boy, is it going to impact Israel. And it is. And Israel, that little state, right, is at the center of a lot of discussions about Ukraine and Russia. Our relationship with Russia, our relationship with Ukraine. What does it mean in Syria? Can we fly into Syria without any obstacles, etc., etc., etc. Whatever happens in the world has an impact upon the Jew. That is why because you have to ask yourself, the Rav asks a brilliant question. You're reading this book. It was written for you and me. It wasn't written as a history book for the Goyim to read. It was written for you and me as Jews to celebrate our holiday called Purim. So why do we care? What impact does this have that he threw two major parties, 180 party, 1 7-day party? It does, because everything impacts the Jew. Lesson number 1. Continue on. The Rav jumps now. And then he says, okay, what kind of party is it? You read it with me. That's why we always read the text. We have to know that. What kind of party does he throw? He throws a party without any stops, correct? Take a look in Pasuk Zion. Something fascinating. And what utensils does he offer them to drink from and to eat from? The kelim mikelim shonim, vessels which were unlike any other, unique. He takes out his best china. But even better than his best china. The kelim shonim, unique. He takes out from the museum. He opens the museum. He has a museum. He says to the curator of the museum, bring out all of the antiques. So we know, Chazal explain, what's kelim shonim? Oh, it's the Beit HaMikdash kelim. What Beit HaMikdash kelim? These are the kelim that belong to Belshazzar and to Nebuchadnezzar first, and then Belshazzar, and they were given to, Nebuchadnezzar took them when he destroys Bias Rishon. He gives it on to Belshazzar, and Belshazzar gives it on to Achashverosh. In other words, he inherited which kelim? The kelim from the Mikdash. Achashverosh apparently inherited these items from his predecessors. But again, 2 seconds, hold off questions and then we'll ask at the end, or else I'm just not going to get through in the time that's allowed it. But I do want to hear. Why, just remember what your question is. Okay, why, however, were the Babylonian kings so interested in the sacred vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. The Jews have one little country called Israel. He has 100 and how many are we told? 127. Isn't that what it says at the very beginning? 127 states under his rule. One little state of Israel. And this is, he tells them, take out from the museum. And what does he want taken out? Kelim Shonim, the unique vessels from the Jewish temple. Why are they, Rabbi Salovich? And by the way, what's the minig? It's the Frankfurt minig that has seeped into all Ashkenaz. Tonight, the Baal Koreh is going to read those words, V'kelim, to which tune? Eicha. Throughout the book, you'll hear whoever is reading. In our case, it'll be Mark, right, in the main shul. It'll be Mark laning, and when Mark lanes and he gets to Kelim Shonim, you listen carefully. You're going to suddenly hear Eicha. In a number of places, we do that. Wherever it alludes to Churban, he changes it. That was a Frankfurt minig that seeped into everyone in Ashkenaz. So we do this. But okay, but we have to ask, what is it that intrigues the Babylonian king about the Jewish temple? The Jew, the Rav points out, the non-Jew has always been intrigued by the Jew. They rejected our way of life. They don't want to adopt our way of life, but they're fascinated by our way of life. They will disagree with us. They will not accept us, but they're intrigued. They are interested in particular one thing. They can't get it through their heads. Why do we need to go back to Israel? The Italians didn't go back to Italy. The Greeks didn't go back to Greece. The Greeks, no other people have gone back to their homeland.
I think they're more intrigued by our survival.
Oh, 100%, 100%. But no nation, if you think about the history of humanity, no nation has been in love with its homeland that they have to go back after thousands of years and recreate a nation state in our homeland. Like I said, the Italians didn't do it, the Greeks didn't do it, the Egyptians didn't do it. Go through all of history. Nobody has done it. You talk to an Italian American, he has a relationship with Italy. Yeah, if he has some krovim there, and it's a beautiful country, I want to go visit. You talk to a Jew, Eretz Yisrael is crucial. Even if the president of Amnesty says that it's not true, right? All 25 Democratic members of Congress agreed that he was wrong. First time they agreed on anything. The first time they all agreed he was out of line. Yeah, because he's wrong. Because the Jew has an association with Eretz Israel. So that's Kelim Shonim is teaching you our interest in, why do we need to know this? Because you should know how the relationship with us is. Achashverosh just represents the entire world. They're intrigued by us. Continue on. Okay, so the party happens, right? What happened? So 180 days. Now jump to Pasuk Yud. Hayom Hashvi'i, Gam Vashti HaMalka, she does a party also. And now, Bayom Hashvi'i, everything hinges on the seventh day of the party. Bayom Hashvi'i, Ketov Lev HaMelech, he's stone drunk. He's inebriated beyond inebriated. He's been saying a lot of l'chayims, right? So the guy is totally drunk. And what does he do? He sends his messengers to bring Vashti. Why are we told? Who cares? What is the author of this book telling me by Yom HaShvi'i? Do you care? It's the seventh day. Why was that important? That is correct. By Yom HaShvi'i represents the Jew vis-a-vis the non-Jew. The answer lies in the fact that there's no bigger contrast between the Jew and the Gentile except the attitude towards the seventh day. For the Gentile, what does the seventh day represent? It's the day the feasting reached its pinnacle. They're stone drunk by the seventh day. For the Jew, the seventh day is not a day of partying. For the seventh, for the Persians, it meant a loss of dignity, a loss of decency, an abandon of all standards. I can be stone drunk. The Jew, the seventh day, now it can be the eighth day as well, because quite often Yontif is the eighth day. But what it means is our holiday is not a pinnacle of abandonment. It's a celebration that's dedicated to God. Dignity is crucial. On the seventh day, we present ourselves to Hashem, and our celebration elevates us as human beings. The contrast is being shown in this Bayom Hashvi. It's not a historic statement. It's already quite a contrast. You're seeing quite a spread of ideas being presented to you here in the first chapter. Now, what happens on the seventh day? So we're told, Katov Lev HaMelech Bayayin. He gets stone drunk. Who's the he? Achashverosh. Our attitude towards wine and its indulgence is also contrasted here in the book. Wine can drag a person into the gutter, or wine can elevate a person. It matters how you drink wine. I got to tell you, many, many years ago, my mother told us that she got a call. They were doing a poll, so they were doing a poll about how people drink alcohol. So my mother answered the phone. In those days, you answered phones and you responded to these kind of things. She said, Madam, can we ask you a few questions? We're doing an interesting poll about drinking in America. Alcohol. So says, do you drink alcohol? So she says, well, yeah. Well, how much do you drink? So my mother thinks, well, so my father gives her a little wine on Friday night for Kiddush, and then a little wine on Shabbos morning for Kiddush. And so she says, the little wine from Kiddush. The man on the other line goes, lady, you don't drink alcohol. You don't drink alcohol, right? When I was growing up, and I'm positive you know this, when I was growing up, what did we say? Ashikir is a goy. We didn't drink. No, things have changed, unfortunately. Things have changed, and we pay for it dearly, right? We're now imitating, and here the Megillat Esther is an important story here. Wine can drag one into the gutter, or wine can lift. And the Jew has always taught how wine is supposed to elevate. The Gemara in Psachim, Kuf Zayin Amid Aleph, teaches us that how do we make Kiddush on Shabbos? Al Hayayin. We do not sanctify Shabbos except over wine. You're supposed to use wine to make Kiddush. What's Kiddush? The sanctification of the day. If we think that is drastic, think for 2 seconds. Remember how we act on Pesach night. 4 cups. By the time we hit number 4, what is the language we're speaking? Do we engage in coarse talk? What do we do at number 4? We sing Hallel. With the wine in us, we don't, God forbid, talk filthy. We talk Hallel. The Rav notes that the Jewish view of the Seudah is totally foreign to the non-Jew. The non-Jew cannot understand our attitude towards the Seudah. And it's being contrasted here. We're looking at this and we're reading this and we're going, this ain't us. This ain't us. That's right. This ain't us. The Jew's explanation of how he understands the Seudah is a contradiction in elements. On the one hand, what is a meal? What is a celebration? It is an animalistic experience, right? You're gratifying your animalistic needs, your physical needs. On the other hand, what is the Seudah? It's a sacrifice, if you will. Our tables are called, what's your dining room table called? A mizbeach. We remarkably treat our table as a mizbeach. I've often told this story. There were a few things that we were told that you could not do in our house. They were the rules of the house. One of them is you can never sit on the table. You never sat on the table. My father would get upset if we would see, some kids sometimes just sit on the table, on the kitchen table, never on the dining room table. Dining room table was too nice to sit on, right? I'm talking about the kitchen table. Sometimes a kid would sit on the kitchen table. my father would say, how can you be sitting on the kitchen table? That's a mizbeach. Those were his words. That's a mizbeach. Our holiest, isn't that unbelievable? What are we saying? Our holiest point in the house is our eating table. Why? Because the Mishnah says in Avos, Perek Gimel, Mishnah Gimel, if three have eaten at one table and have not spoken Torah with each other, it's as if they've eaten sacrifices to the dead. The meal in Judaism is not simply an animalistic experience. The meal in Judaism is supposed to be transformed into a symposium of Torah. That's what the meal is all about. You can't have this kind of partying in a Jewish environment. This party on the seventh day, that would never have happened in the Jewish environment because our table is the Mizbeach. Our table is the fusion of the physical with the spiritual. Furthermore, in Judaism, there's another goal. The goal is the Jew does not eat alone. The Jew invites whom? Stranger, the fatherless, the widow who are within your gates. I just quoted you a pasuk in the Torah. No, okay, that's right. How do we start the Seder, the meal of all meals? We start by inviting those who need. So the Jew has an understanding of a Seudah that never would be in comparison. When we read this, we go, boy, is this foreign to us. It's striking us by the absurdity of how could people act like this? We can't identify with it because it's not who we are. Continue on, Pasuk Yud Aleph. So who does it? So what does he do? He's stone drunk. And what happens when you're stone drunk? You do things that are stupid. Well, guess what? He does something that is stupid. Lohavi esvashti hamalka lifnei hamelach beketer malchut. You know, Chazal say beketer malchut, that she should come stark naked, just wearing the crown. She was a gorgeous woman. Oh, we'll show her off, right? But who's, by the way, read carefully. Which party does he do this to? At which party? At the 180-day party or at the 7-day party? Oh, so what's the question that strikes you? No, what strikes you? What's the question that you ask? Why didn't he invite her to the 180-day party? That was the aristocracy. That was his staff, his ministers, his army, all of the major people that ran the country were at the 180. Who's at the 7-day party?
Everybody, the whole country.
The masses. The masses are there, right? The mob is there. That's the one he invites her to. So Soloveitchik asks a very simple question. Why doesn't he invite her to the 180-day party, right? And that's the first question you have. Rather, he only summons her. By the way, does he invite her? He commands her how? So if you pay close attention, you're going to see, what does she get upset about? How she's invited. But we'll come back to that in 2 seconds. She's livid about how she gets invited. He doesn't invite her. He sends messengers. He doesn't go knocking on her door and say, sweetheart, could you come to the party, please? That's not what happens, but we'll come back to that. So why does he not invite her to the 180-day? Oh, he only invites her when the masses are. Achashverosh was a parvenu. He was a man who had no aristocratic background. Chazal say, do you know who he was? You got to know this to understand this whole book, the Rav points out. Chazal say he was the worker in the stables for Nebuchadnezzar. He had no aristocratic background. How did he become important? Through marriage. Through marriage. He was a parvenu. He had no aristocratic background. He was a stable boy. That's how Chazal understand it. Oh, he was a stable boy. So tell me, he lacked all royal upbringing. He was ill-mannered and he was uncouth because that's the way he was raised. He actually, you know what? He actually hated the nobility. When that 180-day party was misery for him, he had to play host to them because he knew they made sure that he was secure. Remember, Hamolech, what does that mean? He was paranoid. So what does he have to do? What does he have to do? He has to make sure that they're on his side and there's no revolution
Plotting.
behind him, right? How does he do that? I'll throw you a 180-day party. You're going to be treated really nicely. But he hated it. What this all means is he felt out of place at that party. He couldn't relate to that party. For 180 days, he was going nuts. Their speech, their manners, their posture were totally foreign to him. He invites the mobs of Shushan, the regular citizens, and then he's at home. He's enjoying it. He can speak to his chevra. This is his background. He's back at home. The stable boy in him is all reawakened. This explains why he only invites Vashti to the 7th day. In the company of the aristocrats, Achashverosh had to behave with dignity. He realized that if he would have ordered Vashti to appear among the aristocrats, that would have alienated them. That was not appropriate. That was not PC. So he couldn't do it. He had to act politically correct. He knew to the 180-day party, that wasn't appropriate. He would have been condemned by high society, and he would have been labeled uncouth by bringing his wife to the 180-day party. That he could not tolerate. He doesn't want to be reminded of his background, so he has to play along. So how does he play along? He plays along. Oh, okay, the 180-day party, I'll act like one of them. And he does. He's misery, but he acts like one of them. When he was among his own, that's a different story. When the mobs are invited, that's a different story. Then he felt he could be himself. Then he felt there was nothing that was obnoxious in their eyes. There was nothing that was inappropriate, even if it was pornographic. He would win the support of the wild masses. The mobs would support him. You're one of us. Boy, you talk like us, you act like us, you do everything like us. He would be approved by the masses, and that's exactly what happens. And he was going to demonstrate the aristocratic queen is not more important than us. And who's going to support that? Not the 180-day party. Who's going to? The masses, the 7-day party. Continue on. Prosecute base. Batima ein hamalka, Vashti, lavo bidvar hamelach asher biyad hasarisim. What did Vashti realize that she refused to come? Batima ein, she refused. She saw Achashverosh drunk. She sees him inebriated. She sees his vulgar side at this point. He forgot that Vashti was a princess. He forgot who Vashti was. He deserved that she deserved to be treated totally differently. He did not even personally summons her. He didn't go to invite her. He sent his chamberlains. Go, you. Here's your shlichim. Go, you. He sent the post office. Go, you deliver the letter. If we read the verse carefully, that's what she refuses. She didn't refuse the request per se. Rather, it's how the invitation was imparted. She was offended that the king would send for her not via himself, but via underlings. Vashti's dignity was forgotten. Who she was forgotten, and this upset her. There's another striking difference between the Jew and the Gentile that's being put on display here in the beginning of the Megillah, a very important one. The Gentile world, as displayed in the book of Esther, has no sensitivity to the dignity of the woman. None. This is not Avram and Sarah. This is not Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. Not at all. Judaism has a very sensitive approach to the woman, an enormous sensitivity to women. It has no tolerance for women being exhibited as sex objects. We rejected that totally. The Rav noted that the halacha has numerous laws of separation between the sexes for one reason and one reason only. And if you think about it, when Justice Thomas was was going through his whole approval and that's nomination, I said, You remember the accusations against Thomas?
Nita Hill. that word.
Not who, but yes, it was Hill. Remember what they said about him? He filthy language and touching. If you remember, I said it and yichud. So I said, if he would have followed the halacha, he wouldn't be in any trouble. There would have never been negia. There would have never been filthy. Nivelpat is not allowed, and yichud is not allowed. The whole problem wouldn't have happened. In all of these cases, the whole problem wouldn't have happened if halacha would have been observed. Sure, our attitude towards the truth, our attitude towards, he's the Rav in the Rav's words, quite often he writes, I have the impression that the Torah considered woman of a higher existential caliber than man. Quite often I have the impression that the Torah considered woman of a higher existential caliber than man. And so you're seeing a totally different, striking difference between Judaism. As you're opening this book, what are you learning? You're learning so much in this first chapter. It looks foreign to us. This whole story is foreign to us because our values are different. Now, let's go to Pasuk Chaf. So she refuses to come. Now what do? Now they suggest what happens. Pasuk Chaf 20. And the king's decree shall be heeded and obeyed in all its empire. They're going to send out a decree to the entire nation. What is it going to say? That all women must honor their husbands from the greatest to the lowliest. As Ray Soloveitchik says, it is the stupidest law in the world. Listen carefully. One must wonder why this decree is mentioned at all in the Megillah. All the Megillah had to tell me, if I'm interested in knowing how Esther rises to power, what does the Megillah have to do? The Megillah has to tell me, Vashti is gone, God Vashti is out, Esther rises to power. Well, you have to tell me that they sent a letter, a decree, a law that all women have to respect their men. That's what you have to. Why are you being told this? This edict, when one ponders it for a moment, realizes it is the most absurd edict ever thought of. Only an idiot could have issued orders like this. You have no way of instituting legislation. You can't follow this. Like, you're going to go into everybody's house and you're going to see how husbands are be treated by women. How can you do that? No legislation is able to regulate the intimate relationship between a husband and a wife. This all depends upon the relationship, what the character of the relationship between a husband and a wife is. Yet Hashem willed that Achashverosh issued this ridiculous order for one purpose and one purpose alone, to undermine his prestige in the eyes of the people. What happens here at the end of chapter 1 is this Achashverosh, who was so worried about Hamolech, his paranoia, HaKadosh Baruch Hu demonstrates to the world that he's an idiot. The Gemara debates, is Achashverosh a Rasha, or is Achashverosh an idiot? That's the debate. The Gemara says, when you want to size up this man, Achashverosh, how do you size it up? So Rav Soloveitchik is suggesting an idiot. He's an idiot. He's a nar. He's a real fool. Why is he a real fool? For so many reasons, because we know his background. He had no business being king. He was, as the Gemara says, he was the stable boy. And you can't suddenly transform yourself from a stable boy into a king running not only one country, but 127 countries. He was the most important emperor of the time, right? And how could he demand this kind of thing? Hashem willed Achashverosh to issue this ridiculous order to undermine his prestige in the eyes of the people. They lost faith in their leader when they received this ridiculous edict. He lost total credibility in their eyes. You think husbands and wives, you think the wives were upset about this? The husbands looked at this and they laughed. Wait, you're demanding my wife to treat me like, and if she doesn't, what am I supposed to do with her? What am I going to do with my wife? What is this? Why is this essential to the story? It's essential, argues Chazal. The Gemara says in Yud Beis Amid Beis in Maseches Megillah. Listen to the words. Rava said, were it not for this first letter, which means this first edict, this is the first edict in the entire book. There are going to be other edicts, as you know. Were it for not for this first letter, not one survivor would have been left among the Jewish people. Listen again to what Rava's insight is. Rava said, if it was not for this first edict, no Jew would have survived. No Jew. Rashi says, and I read Rashi, for the people would have hastened to kill all of the Jews at the command of the king. In his second letter, he sends out, the second edict is with Haman. You're going to go destroy the Jews. They wouldn't have waited for the appointed time. They would have, Rashi says, as soon as they received the second, they would have gone and killed the Jew. We know that. We know that that's exactly what happened in Europe, right? The Germans walk into a country and wonderful Ukrainians. The debate is, were the Ukrainians worse than the Lithuanians? Were the Lithuanians worse than the Ukrainians, right? Who killed the Jew worse? As soon as they had the opportunity to kill the Jew, they did it. That's not what happens in the book of Esther. What happens in the book of Esther, ladies? That's not what happens. The edict is sent and they wait 11 months before they implement it. No, they could. That's what. If you're given the right, that's what the Rashi says based on Rava. If you're given the right to kill the Jew, I'll kill him right now. I'll murder, and we know that's exactly what happens. They don't wait. Why did they wait? Rava says, were it not for this first letter, not one survivor would have survived the hands of the non-Jews. Because, and Rashi says, they would have immediately, when they received the edict to kill the Jew, what would they done? They would have done it right away. They wouldn't have waited. Why do they wait? Why do they wait? Because they're scratching their head and they go, is this another stupid edict coming from our crazy king? And what's going to happen if we do? We'll be later found to be murderers. He'll blame us. Like, he sent us this thing. He kills his Vashti. Then after he kills his Vashti, what happens? He wakes up from his stupor. And what does he say? Oh, what did I do? And then what does he want? Who does he want to blame? You know the story. He blames his underlings. How did you do this to me? Correct? So what are they worried about? What's the citizen worried about? What's the mass citizen worried about in Shushan when he gets the letter that you can go kill the Jew?
I'm better off doing nothing.
I better wait. I better find out. Is this really the plan of the king? Why do you do that? Because we don't trust this king. He's demonstrated he's a little off, right? And that's why the whole miracle of Purim was possible, because, as the Gemara says, he sends this stupid, idiotic, ridiculous letter sent to the people commanding that females give respect to males. Okay, it was because of this stupid letter that people did not immediately execute the order, and they waited until the 13th of Adar, right? They waited 11 months before they were able to implement it. So what do we see in this first chapter? Oh, we have a whole different picture than just, okay, Vashti, it's not just, and Vashti gets killed and Esther replaces her, right? What is the first parak doing according to Rav Soloveitchik? It's painting the whole, it's foreshadowing the whole book for you. The opening chapter gives you a sense. What have you learned? It gives you a sense, number one, that it's foreign to the Jew. What happens in the palace is really wild and crazy for us. We cannot relate to it because the values that they stood for were the opposite values of the Jew. Number one. Number two, what does it tell us? Who is Ahasuerus? What do we know about Ahasuerus? He's a paranoid king who's worried about being undone, right? As a king. Why? Because he knows exactly where he's from. He knows his whole source of power really comes from his wife, correct? He's not aristocratic at all. So he's worried about everybody. And so what does he try to do? He has to win them over. So he throws two parties. He throws the party of 180 days. He throws the party of the 7 days. But the 180 days, he doesn't invite Vashti. When does he invite Vashti? Only with the 7 days when he can talk the language of the regular person in the street. They're just as uncouth as he is. And when does he invite her? When he's stone drunk. And he's stone drunk. And who does he send to bring her? Underlings. That's what upsets her. And then he's advised, okay, after he kills her, he's advised to do what? To make this edict out. This edict. Why are we told about this edict? We're told about this edict because now you'll understand the rest of the story. Why didn't they immediately implement killing the Jew? As the Gemara says, and nothing would have helped us. No Mordechai, no Esther would have saved one Jew. One Jew. That's how much they hated us. They could have easily killed us. No two ways about it. And we know, the generation of post-Holocaust know that very well. You know, people go back to Europe and they want to see their parents and their grandparents' homes. How do the Europeans, how do the Polish, they're worried you're coming to take. They know they're sitting on your land. They know that they took this illegally. They do it, correct? So what does the first chapter do? The first chapter paints the picture of the whole story that's going to unfold for us. You had a question.
I need to remember.
Oh, okay.
But it was
It was towards the beginning.
yeah, right.
Okay, we'll read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't go ahead.
You remember?
Yeah. Okay, in a way, maybe you answered it, but the thing is, in the beginning, it says, it's a little bit confusing because they mention twice Achashverosh, and then 3 years Lemalchuto.
Right.
So
He's gaining his barrier. He's gaining his feeding. It makes a lot of sense. He doesn't start throwing parties right away, does he? Nobody can do that. He has to ingratiate himself. He has to know who he can trust, etc., etc. Then, now he's in power for 3 years. Now what does he do? He wants to ingratiate him and make friends. He's starting to make friends. It makes a lot of sense that he waited 3 years.
yes, but the Hashvosh twice here, I think you alluded to it, but it's like Pharaoh. It's a lineage, a name that goes for many generations. But here he is mentioned.
No, Achashverosh is not like Paro. Paro is a title of emperor. Achashverosh is the name of the king. He is the Melech. He's the name. That's a name, not to be repeated again. Nobody else is Achashverosh. There's only one Achashverosh. There's only one idiot like Achashverosh. Oh, so that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out. This chapter is giving you an insight in understanding him. Read it carefully so you understand what makes Achashverosh tick. It's not a historic puzzle. It's rather an allusion to understanding who Achashverosh is. I think it's a brilliant insight. And then Hamolech, he's paranoid. Know about that. Now read the rest of the first chapter. And the first chapter is teaching you much more than just about Achashverosh, teaching you through who's it being written for. You always have to ask, who's the book written for? Who's its intended audience? You and me. Why do we need to know this? Well, we need to know this because we're being taught a lot of lessons, aren't we? And when you read this story, you say, this can we relate? When you really think about it, this is repugnant to us, how they act. This is just the opposite, the contrast of how the Jew acts and how the Gentile acts. Yes, Rita, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I do this. I know it's a medrash, but I heard that this was a celebration, supposedly 70 years after the first Beit HaMikdash. And
It's
then
a medrash.
because it's a medrash, and then therefore it wasn't built yet, so he was celebrating that it wasn't being built yet, right? That the second one
Okay.
wasn't being built until we made a party. This is.
Yeah, a medrash is figuring out, again, what's the medrash figuring out? I mean, Kalim Shani, what are they bringing these out for? The medrash is asking the same thing Rabbi Soloveitchik asked, of course. Why were they intrigued with the Jewish museum pieces? What, you have all of these museums, all of these rooms filled with, no, bring those out. Bring the, bring the kalim that were used, the gold and the silver, the spoons and the forks that were used in the mikdash. Who cares? Why? Why would you choose that? No, because they were always intrigued by the Jew. And they are. It's fascinating. We're a little people. You stop the non-Jew in the street, the regular non-Jew in the street. Go to, you've seen these, Mark Schiff has done a few of these videos. He'll stop students in UCLA, kids who are in one of the best universities in the country. And he'll ask them, so how many Jews are there in the world? 100 million? Right? 100 million must be. Yeah, but they don't know, they know very little, period, right? And we're a small little people. We're a nothing. Why are they intrigued with us? Because we carry a lot of weight for a very small little people, don't we? Carry a lot of weight. And that's
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever brought this up before, but Vashti and Achashverosh, how did these two get together? Was this a political arrangement? Was it?
Vashti and Achashverosh, the Medrash deals with them. Medrash wonders how did he meet up with? Okay, you can read. There are many midrashim that want to suggest how they met. That's not in the text. It's not in the text itself. But yes, it's they want the Medrash wants to figure it out. Mm-hmm. No, she's what he does. It says they suggest get rid of her. Right. But if you're stone drunk, you do a lot of things that you shouldn't be doing. And they're all stone drunk. Remember what it tells you.
Okay, but like the link, where was Nebuchadnezzar at that time?
Nebuchadnezzar is dead.
Yeah, I know that, but there's a lineage and she's that link.
She seems to be the link. That's correct.
So how, it seems that there'd be a revolution.
When he wakes up the next morning and he realizes what he does. That's why he's sweating big bullets. He's sweating big bullets. 100%. What you're asking is a very valid question, but that teaches you that people do terrible things when they are not in control of their senses. And when are you not in control of your senses? When you are inebriated beyond inebriated. And that's what this story is all about.
There is a word, sod and yain.
Right. Yain nichnas sod yatsa. Yain nichnas sod yatsa. Right. When the wine enters, the secrets exit. Right. So that's why, I mean, you'll never find. I remember I had a Rebbe in high school who said, I'll tell you the difference between the Jew drinking and the non-Jew drinking. When B'nai Torah drink and they get drunk on Purim, right? The obligation is to drink. By the way, most Rishonim and Achronim don't think that you have to drink, okay? And I was from a family that we didn't, like I said, that's how much alcohol we drank. And my father never drank, never. He didn't like liquor and he didn't like liquor. He drank a little wine, right? But I remember my father saying, you know how you're Mekayim Chayav ad lo yoda. You sleep a little on Purim. That's the way the Litvaks used to do it. You sleep a little, you go to sleep, you take a little nap. You won't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai because you're sleeping, right? That's the way a Litvak answered it. They didn't drink. But my Rebbe said, but the ones who did drink, you want to know? You could tell. The wine enters. What do they talk about? Are they schmoozing Torah? What do they talk about at their Purim Sudas? Or are they filthy? Is that what comes out of a Ben Torah's mouth? No, that's not what comes out of a Ben Torah's mouth when when the yayin nichnas. That's the big difference. Again, I don't recommend that anybody should drink. Really, to that point, I don't recommend it at all.
Hasidim encourage it, right? Hasidim
Yeah, they
encourage it.
do,
really
they
really
do.
If you heard someone
Particularly
say-
Lubavitch encourages
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
But
We
no,
heard that a rabbi
Yeah.
shouldn't be a rabbi if he's drunk, so that he
Yeah.
replace it with another rabbi who shouldn't be
I'm-
there because. he
I
should be
was,
drunk.
when I was a student in YU, so I was invited to my Rebbe's Purim Sutta to Rabbi Bleich, J.D. Bleich's house, and he would fill up, we drank wine. No, it wasn't liquor, wine. Yayin nichnas. So you drank a little wine. And so I said, Rebbe, are you going to drink? He says, I can't, because Rabbi Bleich is a major posek. And the telephone rings all the time. He says, I can't be inebriated at all. I need to be able to answer Piskei Halacha, which is true. And while we were sitting there, lo and behold, a telephone call came from Europe with a major shaila, medical ethics. And Rebbe, he had to leave the table. He had to go answer it. Yeah. Anyhow. Okay, listen, we should all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful Purim Sameach.
Purim Sameach, Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Very interesting.
Right, there were Jewish people at the Suda, right? I mean, at that